Alright guys, so in this video we're going to talk about item centers. Okay, so item centers for all intents and purposes are your pivot in Maya. There is such a thing as pivots in Modo, but any of the stuff that I'm teaching you won't need to, you'll just ignore it. Okay, and it is parented to the item center anyway. So if the item center moves, the pivot will also move. Okay, so first let me show you something I alluded to earlier. So under your item button there's this little arrow here in the corner. So that means if you hold the left mouse you can access your pivot, which I talked about, or the 6 key or the 7 key is your item center. Okay, so in Modo you really don't have to, it's just like in Maya when I go into item mode. So if I hit 5 and I move this object in object mode, turn snapping off. Okay, when you're in item mode, when you bring up a gizmo, where your gizmo is actually, unless you have an action center set, a specific one like automatic where you move it, you customize it, that is where your item center is. So if I hit the 7 key, you can see that my item center moves with the item. Now if I back up and I go into polygon mode and I select none, which is all, and I move it, so already the action center is here because it's orienting itself to the average of my selection. If I move that, go to item mode, let's go to center mode, you can see that it did not move the center. So that's just like in Maya. If you move components, it does not move the center of the object. You can see that in my item properties here, aka channel box, we've got no transforms. However, if I go to item mode, move it now, we have transforms. Okay, so just something to note. Okay, so when you move in item mode, you move your item center, aka pivot. Alright, so most of the time you really don't need to. I don't hardly ever move things in item mode. There are reasons, again, when you need a specific rotation axis for objects, for animation especially. But for this workflow, it's just important to know about these. And in a couple videos here, when we actually start modeling for Round Edge Shader, I'm going to show some interesting things with this little robo leg that I quickly modeled here. This was like a 5-10 minute model. Just to have something to work with, and we'll use the action center, or we'll use the item center then. Anyways, a quick note while we're over here. Now that I have transforms on this, you know, you want to freeze transforms in Maya. Well, that's going to be here. So over here under your transforms, if you want to freeze where this thing is and have your item center moved back over here, and your item center, again, if you export this from here and take it into Maya, where your item center is where your pivot will be in Maya. Okay, so we can freeze it. We can freeze position, rotation, blah, 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 or all. Okay, so now it's zeroed out the transforms and moved my center. If I undo that, I'll move it again. We can reset, okay, all. And that's the same nomenclature as in Maya. So what it did then is it just took it where it was, moved the center and the item back to 0. Okay. Now don't worry about zero and add. These are advanced properties that you won't need to, again, really pertain mostly to animation. But you have so much flexibility in Modo. There's so many ways to get exactly what you need for animation purposes. So let's go ahead and let me show you if you just want to, let's say, manipulate this center here by itself. There's a couple ways to do it. So let's go into 7 so you can see specifically the center. And let's go up to edit here. So let's say I want to, my center's off somewhere. Like you can physically select this. So if I just select it and hit the move key, I can physically move my center. So now you can see that item center's over there. Okay, and you can snap it and do all that good stuff with the center. Now if I go to edit and you go down to center to bounding box, there's center to bounding box and pivot to bounding box. It doesn't mean that it's centering something else to the bounding box. It means that it's taking the item center and it's going to align it to the bounding box of this item in a manner that you choose. So you can say center to bounding box center, and that's the same as if I went into polygon mode here and I hit W, right? Because it's the center of all of these polygons. Okay. Going back to item center mode, what we're going to do for this guy is we're going to actually place the item center up here at this point. That way this robo leg can rotate around that pivot there, that point. Okay, so let's if I had just a cylinder here and I could cut these and then I could center to top and then paste them back, but then I'd have to weld it. So we'll just do, I'll show you a couple ways of doing this. So let's go center to bounding box. Oh, my mistake. You have to be in item mode for this to work. So let's hit the 5 key, edit, center to bounding box, top. So now if I hit 7, it's aligned that center to the topmost points. And because if I just had a cylinder again and I hit top, it would be in the middle and it would go to the top. But so now it's in the middle, but at the top of it in the Y. Okay, so let's go ahead and just snap it over. Let's select it, hit Q, select, hit W to bring up the move. Let's go ahead and hit our hotkey X for snapping, but let's hold Alt and say only snap to vertices. Whoops. And then we'll go ahead and just snap this guy over. Now it's item center snapping is a little weird in perspective, so I hit Control Spacebar to bring up this pie menu to get to my top view, or you can use this drop down here for all your views. Okay. So now that we're in an ortho, I'll grab just this handle. In fact, let's just grab this whole handle. There we go. Grab it by that one, and it'll snap there, and it'll constrain to these axes. Okay. Now if I go Control Spacebar back to perspective, it was already aligned to the top, and then I snapped it over in the remaining 2 axes. Okay. So now if I just drop the tool Q, you can see that item center now lives there. So if I go to item mode 5 and I bring up my rotate gizmo in item mode, we can get this rotation, okay, around that point. All right, so good to know. So that's now where my pivot is basically, because the pivot, if I bring up pivot mode, you'll see the pivot is childed to the center. So wherever that item center goes. So just moral of the story is leave the pivot alone. Or you can look into it more. Okay. So let's go back to item mode. Let's talk about just a couple quick things in regards to instancing items. Okay. So now that I have this item over here, all right, and I have my center there, right? Let's say I want to make a array of like a few legs around here or something like that. Okay. We can do that. Let's do that. Let's let me show you a couple of these. So there's your mirror tools. Okay. And those are all fine and well, but if we go into, let's do it in polygon mode. Okay, so let's do it to all the polygons. All right. Let's say we want to mirror this leg over, and we want like a 2-legged, bow-legged guy right here. Okay, so we have all the polygons selected, right? Let's hold down the button on your duplicate tab here on your tools. Hold down the button on mirror because there's this little arrow guy, and there's an instance. Don't worry about replicas. Those are like micro meshes in ZBrush basically. Under all of these, most of these, there's an instance version of these tools. Okay, so we can hold this down and say instance mirror, and what that's done, and now I have it set to auto activate over here in the tool pipe. Okay, we choose our axis. Obviously, X is what I want, and now when I drop the tool Q, okay, we have a instance mesh item over here. Okay, this purple guy with the italics. All right. So if I go into polygon mode here and I try to select, there's no polygons, right? Because this is an instance of this item. So anything I do, to this item will be instanced over here. Now, what the benefit is if I hit 7 to show item center, you have this guy has its own item center, and it's local to where we set the item center on the parent object. Okay. So if I hit, if I go to item mode in 5 and I rotate, this guy can rotate in item mode. You can transform it in item mode, but you cannot do any operations to the components, to the instance. Okay. But now they have their own rotations. So for whatever reason, you want to kind of just, you get what I'm getting at here. Okay. You can do whatever you need to do. Okay. So that's one way. That's how you instance things, and that's a good way to do it, is by polygons. Okay, let's go ahead and delete this guy. It's going to say it's referenced by something else, and that's fine. Let's go into polygon mode on RoboLeg. Okay, and I'm going to quickly show you the clone tool. It's super awesome. Let's do instance clone for the sake of this video, and let's set it to auto activate. Auto activate. I just want to save my config to those changes. Okay. So now it's activated. And you get this little gizmo. All right. So the cool thing about the clone tool, and in this case instance clone, is we drag this guy out, right? Let's set the number of clones. Okay, and we can set between, because here it's going to do it based on this distance, on and on, up to the number of clones that I set. Okay, but if I click between, it goes in between that distance and distributes them evenly. And while this tool is active, you can still move this guy. So you can see how handy this is for placing, rivets, bolts, whatever. Love this tool, love the clone tool. And again, all of these are instances. So the center of all of these, as you can see at the top here, is at the top, and they'll all have their own rotation axis when in item mode. Okay. Now, if I was to, let's just undo that instance there. Let's clone them in polygon mode. Okay, let's just regular clone. It's a different tool, so I gotta auto activate. Okay, now it's auto activated. Let's move it out. Okay. What's happened here is it did not make any additional mesh items because all I've done is I've cloned the polygons inside this mesh item layer. Okay, so if in item mode, the center, well, let's go to center mode. The center still lives where I originally put it because it's the same mesh item and it has not moved the center. Okay, so that's something to be aware of. Okay, that's why if you want to create instances, there's other ways to do it in item mode. I recommend using the duplicate tools, the instance duplicate tools. That's a great way to do it. Okay. So I don't really know that there's much more to say about item centers. Really, they only affect your axes in item mode. We're going to be working predominantly in component mode, but it is something that I wanted to address. So let's go ahead and close the video out here, and in the next video we're going to talk about action centers.